It's my pleasure to welcome one of the best coaches in our industry. He was highly recommended by even Boston Lloyd, so which is weird, to be honest, because Boston doesn't recommend loads of people, and Boston spoke highly about you. So could you please shortly introduce yourself?
My name is Justin Harris. I own Troponin Nutrition, also myoplasmic.com. My background in the sport is bodybuilding and powerlifting. I won the 2004 Mr. Michigan, which is like a local state title, the 2006 Junior USA's, and then took seventh at the 2007 USA's, which was my last contest as a bodybuilder here. And then I did powerlifting. I won the APF Michigan Championships 275 and best lifter, totaling elite in 2007. And the APF Michigan Powerlifting Championships 275 and best lifter, totaling elite. And geez, did I get 2,400 pounds? Also in 2008. So my best lifts were a 924 squat, a 725 bench, and a 700 deadlift. That's with equipment. That's back when everyone used to wear the powerlifting suits. So, and so my education background is my undergrad's in exercise science, and then my master's is in physics with research and experimental atomic physics.
What was the reason you quit the bodybuilding? Because you were really a good competitor. You
I don't know looking back. I mean, I thought I had reasons. I had a young family. With 2 children, a third one kind of planned on the way, and I thought it was just time to move on out of the sport. Looking back, I regret it a little bit. I wish I would have stayed in it longer, you know. But at the time, I thought it was the right thing to do, and I went back to school, and that's why I got my master's degree. So it wasn't, you know, a complete loss or a waste. But I do, looking back, I wish I would have pushed a little further because I think I had the potential to turn professional, but I don't. Not, you know, I thought with the young family and stuff, it was just the smart decision to make at the time.
You were competing with Steve Kukla, right? You were
yeah,
close friend to him.
Yeah, we lived near each other. We were training partners. Funny story with Steve actually is he somehow was at the Arnold Classic, I think the same year because I was working with Optimum Nutrition at the time, and so I was at their booth. And someone mentioned me, he talked to someone that mentioned me, and he actually didn't talk to me at the Arnold Classic, but he got in touch with me back when we got back to Michigan. And he came over to my apartment, and he comes in as an 18-year-old kid, 220 pounds, you know, abs, and he's got this printout from bodybuilding.com, and he says, hey, you know, I want to be a bodybuilder. I think you're supposed to eat chicken, I've been reading. And I'm looking at this guy, and he looks like he could win a bodybuilding competition today, and he doesn't even know the first thing about it. So we got him ready for the Capital City Classic and the Mr. Michigan. He won the team, you know, wasn't even a competition there, but then he went to the team nationals and won the team nationals 2004 and 2005. And then the Motor City Classic, which was a regional competition as an open competitor in 2006. And from there, he just kept going up. But yeah, he progressed incredibly fast. I mean, he was already just a really, really high genetic freak at the start. I mean, you know, 220-pound 18-year-old that didn't know the first thing about nutrition or training or anything. So it was interesting.
But that's interesting because as you see, most of those genetic freaks just come with no knowledge. They are already looking like freaks, as Ronnie Coleman did, as he has, the Steve Kukla. Steve Kukla is as well owner of loads of businesses. He's a businessman and not only a bodybuilder. But do you see him in the future being a top 3 bodybuilder in Olympia? Because to be honest, I do.
I don't know. I mean, possibly. I mean, he was top 5 or 6 the last 2 years, but they were, you know, the competition was down. I think he probably has the potential, but I think also that, like we said with the business, that's probably I don't know how much role I had in that, but that's my proudest thing about him, is that when we met early on, we would talk, you know, and I hooked him up with my financial advisor at the time, and I let him know, you know your worth, you know, never do anything for free unless you know that there's some other value to it, do that work for free for your other businesses, you know, and really kind of try to push the mindset of that. The unfortunate thing with bodybuilders is that they have this incredible work ethic, you know, and this incredible self-drive, but they only apply it to bodybuilding. If they took that same effort and applied it to the rest of their life, I mean, you know, look what Arnold, you know, Schwarzenegger did. That's really where the limit is. And so I think Steve's been really, really good about that. And he's been, you know, made great business moves. And I think he has the potential to be top 3, but from a personal level, as a friend, I almost hope he doesn't take that route because I know he can be incredibly successful from a business standpoint. And he already is. I mean, his Google Classic shows are really doing well. He's got another one in Michigan now. The Booty Queen apparel line is doing really well. You know, he's always got plenty of sponsors. And so he's doing very well.
Speaking about working with freaks, because I just have to mention it, you have turned Luke Sando pro. You helped him.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
How was it working with Luke?
Interesting. He's an interesting freak because the guy would be 270 pounds eating nothing. He had a hard time getting in shape, getting lean enough, and that was really where, you know, where we came in, is because he was really close to turning pro a couple years in a row, and it was just getting that final push. And I've looked back at his diet a couple times over the years, and it was like, man, when he turned pro, I was eating like 6 ounces of meat, no fat, just vegetables, you know, 6 meals a day. It was like 2,200 calories at a guy that's 260 pounds, you know, and he suffered through it. And he was, you know, a ton of cardio, adding fat burners and everything. But yeah, he was one of my favorite people to work with because he's, you know, like everyone's known or said, he was the coolest guy, the funniest guy, friendliest guy. So unfortunate what happened unfortunately, that's far too often how it is. The people that are so outgoing and friendly and care about other people so much, you know, tend to have a deep inner demon kind of.
You know, I have spoken to him. We have made a podcast like 3 days before he passed, and he was so kind. You know, he spoke about us meeting at the Olympia because there was no, you know, this whole situation with travel bans and so on. We wanted to meet each other there and go eat and so on. So he was really, 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 really a nice guy. Nothing bad to say about him. And even the same thing happened to Dallas. You know, he was such a nice kid. Everyone says only good things about him.
Yeah. It seems that's one of the worst things about humans. It seems like it's the good people are the ones who don't seem to last. Unfortunately, it's too bad. But yeah, no, Luke was. I mean, well, the whole United Kingdom bodybuilding scene is so different than the American scene. They're all friendly with each other, self-deprecating. They make jokes about each other in a good way, the way like friends make jokes, you know. And it's really unfortunate because the American bodybuilding scene never seemed to. There's patches, you know, where groups of guys will train together and have that, but as a general rule, it's more combative here in America, where in the UK, everyone just seems to be, you know, pretty friendly.
Yeah, what I saw that in America, it's more like selfish sport, and then in England, they are just pushing each other, even the American balls of, pushing balls and so on of each other. So then, speaking about one last freak before we go to the perfect off-season diet, so to speak, PhD deadlift. He has the PhD. Yeah. He's then insane. How is he capable? I have to ask this question again because I know that asked him. Asked this question. How is he capable of maintaining such strength with being maximum like 8% of body fat?
Yeah. I'll let you know. Actually, give me a second. We were just going over his plans for the week. So he had a cheat meal yesterday. Here's his cheat meal: a box of egg whites, 6 ounces of 96.4 lean beef, ketchup. He considers ketchup a cheat. A bag of spinach, apples, and strawberries.
He even wrote the spinach.
Yeah. That for him, that's a full-on cheat meal. Is adding ketchup to a meal. But that's really how it is. He's as meticulous and detailed as anyone I've ever seen. But even then, I don't think most people could get that lean, and a lot of people could get that strong. But even then, I don't think most people are able to maintain that strength at that. But it's incredible because I train with him at least a couple times a month. He moved to Michigan. He's about an hour away from me, and I'm just blown away every time because the guy never ever has an off day. I don't train with Jordan Peters, seems to be another one like that, or Dusty Hanshaw. Maybe they're only posting their videos where they're on, but it seems like, man, do these guys never have a weekday or a day where they feel tired? It's like no matter what, they come in and just kill it.
Yeah, I think that Jordan, in particular, he learned to take more days off because he was just a freak about it. He even tore his quad like 2 days ago, you know. I don't know if you heard. He
No, I
had
did
some.
not. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, he had done something. He wrote this on forum that he has done something with his quad, but really, really, he is as good as of competitor and a bodybuilder he is. He's so unlucky with those things.
Yeah. Well, he's so strong. That's the thing is that's kind of where that's I think ultimately where the limit of size comes in is that it gets to the point where and you know Ronnie Coleman was an example also. It gets to the point where it's just really dangerous. And there's a couple things at play. There's one, it's very difficult to get motivated to lift those weights every week. I remember when I would be doing DC training and my Widowmaker set with squats, I was at my absolute peak. I was trying to hit 500 pounds, 495 for a set of 20. And mentally getting ready for that every week. I mean, that is 500 pounds for 20 reps on squat after you do the rest of your leg workout is so incredibly mentally draining that it's really hard to keep that up week after week. And then all it takes is one little twinge and it might be 3 weeks before you're able to attempt it again. You know, someone like a Ronnie Coleman seemed to be able to power through those little injuries, but obviously, you know, what's happened to him now. But that's really kind of, I think ultimately that's where the upper limit of human muscular development is going to be, is that it's that combination of being mentally capable of putting in that incredibly high workload every workout, B, being injury free enough that you're actually able to put into that, you know, workload. Because all it takes is one little tweak to set you back 3 or 4 weeks before you're able to train hard. And it might be 3 or 4 more weeks before you're back up to that strength again. Well, one little tweak, you've lost 2 months of progress. You know, and early on in a career where you're not that strong and your recovery doesn't take that much, it's really easy to make progress. But you really quickly reach a point where the workload levels that are required to progress are so high, the strength you have is so high, and the risk of injury is so high that it's really just, you know, you're like walking a tightrope to make continued progress.
You have a really old school mentality. Same with your clients. I saw that you prescribe some kind of, there are just as many sources of carbs as we can use. But nowadays you see loads of people that are just searching for this magic thing that are trying to reinvent the wheel. Yeah. What do you think about those people?
Well, I think for the most part, the book's been written. I mean, the sport hasn't progressed dramatically in nearly 30 years. People still talk about the late 90s, you know, and so really, you know, if you look at it, you know, logically or systematically, you have guys in the 50s, 60s, 70s. They didn't really know what they were doing, so it'd be really high training workloads, training every body part 3 times a week, training every day, you know, anabolics started to come into play. But no one really, you know, does milk work, you know, they're kind of figuring things out, you know, and it kind of got refined into where training became to the point where it was obviously going to be different than strongman or weightlifting or powerlifting, because, you know, you're not training for performance, you're training for the hypertrophy results of the training. And so people started to realize that rather than there's a certain level of frequency you'd have where you need to do multiple sets, you know, and a certain level of volume, which takes a certain level of recovery. And over time, that kind of transitioned into the bro split, the 5 times a week bodybuilding routine. And I think that's one thing that's sort of getting improved on. And Jordan Peters is kind of on the forefront of that with the more abbreviated training and slightly more focused. Scott Stevenson's also kind of on the forefront, I think, with that. But you're almost peaked on that. I don't think there's much room for progress. And then as far as anabolics, that's pretty much been maxed out. You know, with the growth hormones, that's been maxed out. The insulin's been maxed out. The peptides came into play, and I don't think the sport ever really progressed at that point. You know, I think if you look when those came in, you know, in the early 2000s, the bodybuilding hasn't improved. You know, it peaked really around late 90s, early 2000s, and it's kind of stayed level there. And so I think there's, you know, obviously you always want to improve on the wheel, but I think the likelihood that we're at a point where we can completely reinvent the wheel is pretty slim. The sport's been around in some level for over 100 years. It's been around in a competitive level for, you know, 80 years, and it's been around in a pretty refined level at least since the mid 80s, you know, which is now we're coming up on 40 years there. And so it's unlikely that you're going to reinvent the wheel. So I think people should always be trying to find new information, but my general thought on that is, yes, we want to improve, but no one's beaten Ronnie Coleman in size or conditioning at this point. Yeah. And so you're probably pretty safe in saying, rather than trying to do, you know, I'll say this, there's an old Simpsons episode, a Simpsons TV show. I don't know if you guys have it.
Yeah, we have.
Okay, where Bart Simpson gets moved out of the regular class and puts in a class for slow learners. And Bart says, let me get this straight. We're supposed to catch up to the rest of the class by learning slower than them, you know, and that, and so that's kind of like when people say, you know, like, you know, it's already been done. We have like the pinnacle of the sport would be like a Ronnie Coleman. Rather than trying to do something totally different than him to beat him, maybe we should see what he did and see how we can refine that better. That's really, I think, our best chance to improve as a sport. It's not rewriting the book, but taking the book and really fine tuning all the chapters.
When speaking about off season, because we want to in the future, in a few seconds, we are going to speak about the diet as well. But the first thing that I see nowadays, even I've been there, so to speak, there are people that are trying to stay too lean in the off season. What does it mean for you to be too lean? Because watching the PhD, but we have to say that PhD is an anomaly. Yeah. That he's something different. But what is the perfect body percent that we shouldn't pass?
I think that we can look at that, and there's actually not studies on bodybuilders, but we can take data on hormone levels and how the body functions in just regular humans. And testosterone production peaks, and aromatase estrogen is minimized. Growth hormone and IGF-1 production and insulin sensitivity are all maximized in human males, and untrained or anything human males in about the 8 to 12% body fat range. Above 12% body fat, and you start getting a decrease in insulin sensitivity, you start getting a decrease in testosterone production, and even worse, you get an increase in aromatization to estrogen from the testosterone you do produce. So I think it's clear that above about 12% body fat, you're getting diminished returns on your progress, because your insulin sensitivity is decreased, and regardless of exogenous supplementation with testosterone, your estrogen levels are going to increase. And both of those things are working against you in progress. So I don't think more than 12% is, and I hate saying a percentage, because people post a picture of Andreas Munzer on the internet and someone will say, oh, he's 33% body fat. You know, people get so worked up about body fat levels. And so for me, 12% is you need to see an outline of abs, at least a faint outline. You know, you're not shredded, but you need to see some abdominal muscles. You need to see some separation in the quadriceps. You're not going to have striated glutes, but you need to look like a bodybuilder, not an offensive lineman in football, or not a rugby player, maybe. Maybe rugby players are probably actually lean enough, but in American football, like the offensive lineman, you don't want to look like that. Now, how lean is too lean? I think the bottom end is about 8%, and that's what the studies also show. Below 8%, and you start getting a decrease in testosterone production as well. And so you don't want to be so lean that you have tight feathering in your quads, or, you know, a striated glutes. So somewhere in that range, I think, is optimal.
I want to have some scenarios, so to speak. Let's have the first scenario when we are at the peak, so 12%. Do we maintain there, just not increasing the calories, keeping and slowly, you know, just either try to stay at the same weight just to keep it, or do we mini cut?
I think it depends on where you are at in the off season. If you're past the halfway point of the off season, I think you keep going. There's no point, there's not enough time to diet down. And so I think at that point, you're trying to hold where you're at body fat wise and try to get any muscle growth that you can. And the idea that you need to eat more calories than you burn to build muscle is false. If androgen levels are high, your rate of protein turnover is high enough, your potential for protein synthesis is high enough that you can still synthesize new muscle tissue even in a calorie deficit. Now, it's not optimized, but it can happen. And so at that point, it doesn't mean that the growth stops. It just means that you don't have any more room for error of pushing calories too high and letting fat accumulate. If it's early in the off season, definitely get leaner, because you're going to grow better. And what I always say to people that you know, don't want to take the time, they don't want to take a break from dieting because they don't want to lose that time that they could have been, those weeks or months that they could have spent growing muscle. And I usually give two examples. The first example is I say, look at any amateur bodybuilder. What happens to them when they turn pro? They start growing really rapidly. Why is that? Well, as an amateur bodybuilder, you typically compete once a year, or in one period of the year. Like in America, the USAs are usually in July, then the North Americans are in August or September, and then the nationals in November. So there's like a chunk of time where everyone competes, and then they spend the whole rest of the year getting ready for that competition cycle. When you're a pro and you're trying to qualify for the Olympia, you're doing multiple contests a year. And so what benefit of that is? Well, that means multiple times of the year, you're starting an off-season growth period at extremely low body fat. And I always say to people, imagine how much muscle you could grow if you could add 20 pounds of fat and still be lean. And that's where you're at. When you come out of a contest, you can add 20 pounds of body fat and still have abs. Imagine how much muscle you could build knowing that you could eat so much that you can gain 20 pounds of pure fat and still be lean. And that's what happens with contest prep. And so that's why people always say, you always hear guys coming up the ranks that say, I don't want to just do a show. When I do a show, I want to look like a pro on stage. That will never happen. You'll never, and the reason you'll never do your first show looking like a pro is because most of your growth happens when you've dieted down and get to start an off season at a low body fat. And so I think that's like we call them permabulkers, and that's the biggest problem with, and why permabulkers never become the huge mass monsters that they want, is because they never diet down and get themselves in that prime optimal range where they have a really low body fat and can push off season for a long period of time without getting too fat.
What's the optimal time to take the off season, so to speak?
What I like to do is a kind of a general rule, and this is because most people you're going to work with are amateurs. So as a pro, it's kind of different. But as a pro, you're doing different things. You're refining and you're trying to compete for money rather than continue to progress quite as much. And so what I recommend is like a 16-week off-season blast cycle. So you push hard for 4 months, and then you take 4 to 6 to 8 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks is a cruise, and then you start your contest prep. And your contest prep is 16 weeks. And then after your contest, you do 4 more weeks of a mini rebound right after the contest when you're really optimized for growth. And then you do another cruise for 4 to 6 weeks. So basically 16 weeks, a month, 20 weeks, a month. And that kind of roughly works out to about 1 competition a year and 1 really long off-season cycle per year.
Would you reverse diet or rebound?
Well, both. I rebound, but I don't let people get fat. And so I don't know quite where the difference would be. What I can call rebound, some person might call a reverse diet. I can tell you my base protocol. Everyone gets a little different, but my generalized protocol would be immediately after your contest, that night and the next day, you get to eat whatever you want. Get it out of your system. And then the following day, we start a string of 5 consecutive high carbohydrate days. And if you follow one of my diets, it would be that high carbohydrate day. And the last meal of each of those 5 days is a cheat meal also. So for 5 days, your calories are very high, and you also get the end of the day to get all the cravings out of your system. At the end of that now, it's the 7th day after the contest. If the contest is on a Saturday, it's not the next Saturday. At that point, you should be ready to follow an off-season diet. That doesn't mean, as strict as a contest diet, but at that point, you've had a big burst of calories. You should be ready to follow a focused diet and get to work. And at that point, then we start working on, increasing calories and building up the diet. And actually what I do, I never push weight with my clients. I never try to have them increase weight. And the reason is in the short term, any weight gain is almost guaranteed to be fat. And I'll explain the reasoning behind that is if you gain 15 pounds of muscle a year, that's 75 pounds of muscle in 5 years. So that means if you're a 20-year-old kid at 200 pounds, if you gain just 15 pounds of muscle a year, you'll be 275 pounds, a 275 pound mass monster at age 25. Well, that's only 15 pounds a year, which is just a little bit more than 1 pound a month. So trying to make scale changes when you're, so most people aren't even going to grow that fast, because even if they did grow that fast, they would go from 20-year-old 200-pound gym rat to 275-pound mass monster in 5 years. But even if they could, that's only about 1 pound a month. Well, 1 pound, that's 16 ounces of water, So you drink a glass of water before you step on the scale, and that's a bigger change than you'll grow a muscle over an entire month. So it's hard to, so your weight just doesn't change enough. So what I try to do with clients, rather than try to increase their weight, is I try to increase their food intake, their calorie intake, without getting fat. And so then the goal basically becomes continue increasing food and teaching your body to digest and assimilate more and more good, clean food without getting fat, and then get really strong in the gym. And the end result is if you're, you know, everyone wants to get big, but if you're eating 7,000 calories a day, not fat and strong as hell in the gym, you're going to be big whether you want to or not. You don't have to worry about it at that point. So that's what I try to do.
Yeah, and I think that the main reason as well is that because you said that you can build muscle in the deficit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There are many
Kevin Levrone was a perfect example of that. You know, Kevin Levrone used to come into, you know, start training for the Olympia 2 months out, you know, skinny fat and turn into Kevin Levrone.
Yeah, but Kevin Levrone as well used loads of muscle memory, so to speak, because no one would go this far away of training and dieting and so on.
And even most people with muscle memory couldn't do what he did.
No. Yeah, so there are, I know that many people don't like this name, but there are, of course, hyper responders, so to speak.
Oh yeah. So, sorry.
Yeah, Kevin was one. But do you think that if he would keep the same style of training and so on, the same attitude whole year, would he become a Mr. Olympia, or would he
I think probably. I think if he, especially because his prime was right around where 1998 came in. And I think, I mean, Ronnie Coleman won and he was clearly the deserving winner, but I think he only won because no one else was on. If Flex Wheeler would have been 100%, or if Kevin Levrone would have been 100%, even if Ronnie might have deserved it, it wouldn't have been as noticed as much because everyone would have been looking for the favorites and seeing that the favorites were on point. And I think, yeah, definitely. I think possibly Durant in 97 was close enough. I mean, Nasser probably should have beat him. Nasser did beat him from the front, but Kevin had the potential to beat him from the back also, or maybe not beat him, but not look so bad from the back. So I think definitely Kevin, in 2002, he could have won also. If Kevin would have continued straight through, never taking a break, with the way he would have looked in 2002, definitely would have beaten probably Ronnie Coleman in 2002. Or also, I mean, 2001 also when Jay almost beat him.
Coming back to the diet itself, when we are on the perfect scenario, as we said, post-show, we have done this phase of cleaning off the diet, being on the cheat meal, 5 high days, and so on, as you said before. And now we are to the diet, back to the diet. You know, we have the base diet, and you implement high days. How often would you implement the high days at the beginning?
At the beginning, 1 to 2 days per week, and see how they tolerate. And that's usually the biggest thing is people with, you can almost tell who's going to make it in the sport by how they tolerate the high days. The guys who are going to make it almost always can jump right to 3 high carbohydrate days a week. When I say high carb days, I'm talking like Ben Pollock's high days are 1,200 grams right now, 1,200 grams of carbohydrates, you know, and insulin is used also. And so it's a really good indicator of whether or not you have the genetics as to how you tolerate that. The guys who tolerate that and just soak all that right up in the muscle, we can jump right pretty quickly to 3 high carb days a week. And so if they train 5 days a week, 3 of them will be high carbohydrate days. The other 2 training days will be what I call like a medium carb day. And then their off days will be slightly lower carbohydrate. But it starts at 1 to 2 high days.
And how much would they differ? You know, I know that there is not a set spreadsheet because it's different from everyone.
Yeah, in general, if I took someone who would be at 1,000 grams of carbs on a high day will probably be between 400 and 500 on a medium day and around 300 on a low day. But it's total calorie cycling because the proteins, typically the protein is about the same on medium and low. Sometimes it's a little higher on low, but fats will be higher on low. So really it's about, I would say, if you take medium day and set whatever the calorie count is and say that's your baseline, high days are about 130% of that, and low days are about 70% of that.
In the high days, you have added fats or just
no added fats. So the high days, they're really difficult because it's moderate protein. You know, at 12, most people are between 35 and 40 grams of protein per meal. The really large guys might get 45. You know, the super heavies might get 50 per meal. Very rarely though, even most people are 30 to 40 grams, and then no added fats. And the reason isn't that because insulin will make the fat get stored as fat. It's that we just only have so many calories and we're trying to maximize glycogen storage on that day. And not only glycogen storage, we're trying to take the effects of all those carbs are going to spike insulin and you might be taking insulin on top of that. And what insulin does is it drives amino acids into the muscle tissue. So it increases the amino acid uptake of the cell. So insulin binds to the cell, it shuffles some proteins around, and it allows more amino acids to get sucked up into that cell. And so we don't want to waste any calories from fats when what we're trying to maximize is the amino acids from the protein and the carbohydrates. I mean, and there is going to be fats because my diets are animal meat proteins for the most part. And so it's going to be mostly chicken or turkey on those days. So there is fat in it, but we don't add any additional fats.
When choosing, so you rotate between every macronutrient, not only carbs. So protein are rotated. So you aren't really a high protein guy, as Chad Nichols, for example, was.
No, and I give a reason for that. And if you just look at the numbers and you say, how much of that protein is actually being turned to muscle per day? And so let's say, take an easy number and take 500 grams of protein. Well, that's 1.1 kilogram, 500 grams is 1.1 pounds. And so if all of that was turning to muscle, you'd be gaining over a pound of muscle per day, you know? So what happens with those amino acids? So those amino acids aren't turning to muscle. What they do, some of them replace natural muscle turnover, you know, your cardiac muscle, your gut, your intestines, smooth muscle tissue, those need to be replaced. You know, those get damaged too. And so those protein amino acids kind of repair those. And there's natural muscle turnover all over. And then some of that, the breakdown from your workout, some of that stimulates protein synthesis to actually build new muscle. But hardly any of it does. What happens to the rest is it gets converted to glucose through gluconeogenesis. And then it might get used as energy, it might get stored as glycogen. If it doesn't for that, then it gets converted to acetyl-CoA, and then that goes into the fatty acid synthesis pathway, and then that can be used as energy or triglycerides, or then it can be stored as fat. So most of it isn't used as protein. So the problem is no one knows how much. So really, if you track, we go back to that 15 pounds of muscle per year thing, which means you go from gym rat to pro bodybuilder in 5 years. That's only about 25 grams of new muscle growth per day. That's only 1 gram per hour. So you don't need very much, but no one's going to suggest only eating 1 gram of protein per hour, you know, because we don't know where the limit is. So I don't know the exact number. I just know that we're not turning 500 grams of protein into new muscle. So I'm a moderate protein guy.
I'd like to compare you to somehow to Chad, you know, because Chad used to give so much. He used to give so much protein and so on, because he said that there might be days that you are not getting enough. But you come from more. I mean, you take your knowledge more from the science background, so to speak, because you saw that the protein is going to be converted into the glucose anyway. So why not just simply give more carbs?
Yeah. And so my basic approach to that is, I mean, you can't, it's a safer, I don't know if it's a safer approach, but it's a kind of, you can't go wrong with protein, because protein can turn into all the other nutrients. It can turn into carbs and it can turn into fat. So by just throwing protein at the problem, you know that you're never going to be short of protein. But my thought is, that makes sure that you're never short, but are we optimized? You know, we know no matter what, we're only turning about 25 grams of protein to new muscle per day. We know we need to eat more than 25 grams, but we don't know how much. So rather than just throw protein at the problem, you know, why don't we, you know, it's like, if we know we need to, you know, shoot an enemy, we can just, you know, blindly fire guns like this and know eventually they're going to get shot, or we can put a scope on a gun and, you know, and be targeted. That's my approach, is rather than just throw protein at the problem, let's analyze how protein synthesis occurs. And the way it occurs is, one, there needs to be a trigger for it, which would be like training, and actually eating triggers protein synthesis also. But mTOR gets triggered, L-leucine is a trigger. So muscle protein synthesis is triggered for some reason. Now what helps maximize the chance that it's going to get converted? One, we need all the amino acids, and we need all the essential amino acids. So we need a diet that's high in complete proteins. That's as far as the high protein diet goes. It just guarantees that there's lots of protein. But there's more involved. And one we just talked about was how insulin works in the process. Insulin increases the amino acid uptake at the cell. So rather than just having lots of protein floating around, let's make sure the door is open for the protein to go into the muscle. And that's kind of the approach I take. It's not like a low protein approach. I mean, my medium days for most people are 50 grams of protein per meal. My low days are 50 to 60 grams. when I say people, I'm talking about, you know, heavyweight or super heavyweight bodybuilders. So it's not low protein, but rather than 500 grams a day, we're talking, you know, 300 or 350 grams a day.
With the best approach, would you rather eat only food, or would you supplement with isolate, concentrate, and so on?
Only food, only food. And I'll give you, I'll give my, and I should say it's not, you know, it's not like not eating is better than, you know, if you can't get whole food, then you have the shake. But I'll give my reason again, and I'll say, let's take a pure whey isolate. You know, no one knows how fast it digests, but we know it digests fast. And people always say, oh, that gets burned in an hour and a half. So let's say an hour and a half. So if I have a 50-gram whey protein isolate shake, that's 50 grams of protein that's in and out in an hour and a half. Well, we already been talking about that the rate of muscle protein synthesis, the maximal rate is about 1 gram per hour. So we had that 50 grams for an hour and a half, and only 1.5 grams of it actually had a chance to turn into muscle. The other 48.5 grams were used for other sources. It's just in and out too quick. Now let's take an animal protein source. Now, and I've given this example many times, but everyone at some point in their life has gotten sick for whatever reason, you know, like get the flu.
Steak example.
Yeah. And they puke, and steak shows up, and they go, when did I eat steak? Was that yesterday? And so now let's look at it. So that means that steak is always slowly trickling amino acids. And even better, it's a complete protein source. And even better, steak is really close to the amino acid profile of our own muscles. So it's, you know, rather than just blasting protein at the problem for an hour and a half with a whey shake, we have, you know, 20 hours where amino acids are trickling in. And so there's always a steady level of blood amino acid levels. That's more important than a huge flush of amino acids, which is the protein shake gives. Now, if you can't eat a whole food meal, a protein shake's better than not eating, clearly. But in my opinion, whole food is always better. And I think it's really, it's amazing that the supplement market, the protein market did as well as it has done as well as it does. Because if you remember the Battle for the Olympia videos, or in the 90s and early 2000s, all those training videos were really popular. Mitsuru Okabe used to put out. You can go watch any Battle for the Olympia and see guys eat hundreds of meals in Olympia prep. Or you can watch Jay Cutler's videos and see him eat hundreds of meals for his prep. And you can see every meal they're eating meat and rice, or meat and potatoes, or meat and rice cakes, or, you know, egg whites and rice cakes. They're never chugging protein shakes. They're always sitting down and eating a meal. And so to me, that's like, geez, if all the top guys in the world, I have evidence of what they're doing, and they're all eating whole protein. Now the science is great, but do I even need the science at that point when I can see what the 10 best guys in the world have done for the last 30 years, and they're eating their meat. They're not drinking their protein shakes.
So when it comes to the protein choices, So I sounded so European. When it comes to the protein sources, would the best way to optimize the uptake be, of course, the food itself, but every meal should be different?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you need some variety just to make sure that because there is something called a rate limiting amino acid. And that means of all the amino acids in that source, whatever essential amino acid is the lowest concentration, that's the maximum amount of protein synthesis that source can create. Now, so that does come into play, but that really only is important for vegetarian diets. Like corn is really low in L-tyrosine. And so that's L-tyrosine. So that's the rate limiting amino acid. Now, the rate limiting amino acid for whole or like animal sources isn't even an essential amino acid. It's like a non-essential amino acid. So it doesn't really even matter. So I think for variety, it matters, you know, because, you know, you don't want to get too bored with the diet, because as much as we all say, I don't eat for taste, I eat for purpose. It's still, it's still nice when our food tastes good. We're much more likely to follow the diet if we're happy with it. So, I mean, I think a mix, but really only for that reason, not because of any actual benefit of progress.
I know that you are a busy man, but so I want to jump into the supplementation so fast. Yeah. Intra-workout supplementation, would you then add EAs, some kind of carb source, glutamine? What would be the perfect intra-workout supplementation?
EAAs for sure. I used to like BCAAs more because they trigger the protein synthesis. And my thought at the time was that you're eating a whole food source before and after the workout, so you're getting your EAAs there. But at this point, I just switched to EAAs just to guarantee you have what you need for the muscle protein synthesis. And I like to recommend a high molecular weight carbohydrate like waxy maize or carbolin or highly branched cyclodextrins. But that's really more in the off season. If you're dieting, your stomach's never full and your gastric emptying rate's so high, there's nothing that's going to cause bloating really. At that point, you can drink straight Gatorade, it's going to power through. But in the off season, when you're eating a lot of food, you want the osmolaric effects of a high molecular weight carbohydrate, meaning that if you drink like a Gatorade, it kind of pools in the stomach longer, where a high molecular weight carbohydrate pulls water with it that pushes it through the stomach into the small intestine. When you're dieting, nothing sits in your stomach long because you're so hungry. So it doesn't matter as much then. So I would probably, if I had to pick the ideal one, it would be essential amino acids, a high molecular weight carbohydrate, probably some creatine. And then I actually like to add like a teaspoon of baking soda. And the reason for that is the sodium in it actually.
Yeah.
But because it's a bicarbonate, it's also an acid. And so it kind of calms your stomach a little bit. And then it also creates a carbonation. So it's like drinking a soda for your intra workout rather than but it's like drinking a salty soda. So it's not quite that great. But that I like to do that. If you don't want to do the sodium bicarbonate, then you could add a little sea salt. And that kind of facilitates a pump. You'll get a much better pump. But I'll also say that with the caveat that while I think intra workout is very important, and I think there's clear evidence that it improves progress, I'll also say that no Mr. Olympia has ever used an intra workout shake. So how much progress it actually creates and this is where I always get really, you mentioned old school. This is my biggest pet peeve, is that people focus so much on the minor details. No Mr. Olympia has ever used an intra workout shake. Would they have been better with one? Yes, I believe they would have. Maybe 1% better. So Ronnie Coleman say he was 300 pounds at his absolute best. 3% or 1% of 300 pounds is 3 pounds. Does Ronnie Coleman look different at 297 or 303 pounds? Probably not. You would never notice the difference. What you notice is the 300 pounds. And that 300 pounds comes from eating meat, rice, and training your butt off. So.
Yeah, as we spoke, you can't reinvent the wheel to.
Exactly, yeah.
But your diet are high carbs, as we spoke, and the supplements to improve or to maintain the good sensitivity, because there are plenty of GDAs. Do you use GDAs with your clients?
If they need it. I try not to. And the reason is like metformin and berberine, they work through the same cyclic AMPK pathway that ibuprofen does, which is like an anti-inflammatory pathway. And the problem is muscle growth is actually an inflammatory process. And that's why, if you remember, I think Gaspari Nutrition came out with arachidonic acid, which is an omega-6 inflammatory fatty acid. Or if you remember when people were trying to supplement with prostaglandins. And so actually inflammation is a part of muscle growth. And the problem is that inflammation also causes those negative things like joint pain and a decrease in insulin sensitivity. So I like to use berberine. I don't do a mix of GDAs. I just go straight berberine from a reputable source. I recommend between 1,000 and 1,500 milligrams a day, but I only recommend it if you're showing signs of decreased insulin sensitivity. And the reason is because that if you're not showing signs, why take something that could potentially diminish muscle growth? Now, do I think it actually diminishes muscle growth to a level that's measurable? No. And I'll give the reason is that most pro bodybuilders take a lot of ibuprofen. But I can't imagine Ronnie Coleman or Tom Prince was a good example of guys that were loading up on ibuprofen. And so if you're on, anabolics, GH, insulin, and all those things, some little thing like berberine, it's like trying, if you put if you tape a stuffed animal to the top of your car, it's going to be slower because there's going to be more wind resistance. But it's not going to be measurably slower. If you've got a 600 horsepower car, it's going to be slower with more wind resistance, but it's not going to be noticeable. So, but if you don't have a problem with insulin sensitivity, I don't recommend anything. If you do, I recommend berberine.
What would be signs of the sensitivity?
The first sign would be elevated fasted blood glucose, but I don't like to use that. I really don't like to use that with the larger guys. And the reason is when you get like the guys that are really big, they can't sleep on their back because they can't breathe, and they can't sleep on their side because everything gets pissed off. So they're sleeping like this, and there's decreased blood flow to their arm. Half the time they wake up, their arms asleep. Half the time they're on GH and their arms asleep. And we don't know what the blood flow to that finger is. And so I'll see a lot with the guys, especially the guys over 250 pounds. They'll check their blood sugar in the morning, and it could be any number. It could be 70, it could be 120. We'll have them, you know, shake their arms out, walk around the house for 5 minutes and test it again, and it's a totally different number again as that blood gets moving around. So I like to use A1C. It's a measure of long-term blood glucose levels. The problem with that is you can really only track that in a blood test. So it's, you're limited to how often the person gets blood work to know whether they're really insulin sensitive, if their insulin sensitivity is really down. But if we're seeing fasted blood sugars above 100 fairly consistently, then I think at that point it's time to, well, I would recommend blood work to actually see what your A1C is. But at that point, it's probably smart to start supplementing with berberine.
What are your thoughts on cardio as the last question, because I know that you have to go soon. What are your thoughts on cardio?
I got about 15 minutes, but yeah.
Yeah. On the off-season cardio.
Yeah, I like high-intensity interval sessions for cardio, off-season and contest prep. The only time I change it is late in a contest prep when people don't have the energy to do the high-intensity stuff. But I like short bursts. I typically recommend 3 to 4 days a week of 12 minutes. And that 12 minutes is only 6 hard minute sessions. So I'll do, and I don't do it so hard that you can only do 30 seconds. I say push as hard as you can for a minute, then rest for a minute. And the reason for that isn't for fat burning. It's more, and it's not even for nutrient partitioning. It's for actual GPP, general, you know, preparedness for your training, general physical preparedness. Because the problem, and we talked about this earlier, what those limiting factors are when you get really big and really strong. When your high rep sets on squats are 500 pounds, you start running into the problem where the limiting factor is no longer your muscle failure, it's your lungs. Yeah. And so that's why I do it, just to keep, you know, because no one likes to do cardio. It sucks. And no one likes to do HIIT cardio because that's even worse. But if it comes down to not being able to train to your maximal capacity because your lungs fail before your muscles do, then you're slowing your growth. So I recommend, 3 to 4 days a week, 12 minutes per session.
You helped Ben Chow as well. He used to do the HIIT not so far ago.
Who's that?
Ben Chow.
Oh, yeah. We started with Ben. Ben was kind of late in contest prep. And so we did it at first, and he was making really good progress, but he started holding water a lot in his legs. And that's always the hard decision when to know, because you're going to burn more calories with it. You also get the EPOC, the elevated post-exercise oxygen consumption, but that's really not a big level. That might be 50 or 100 calories a day at best, but even 100 calories a day is more than 0 calories. But the problem is you reach a point, there's a point of diminished returns. Early in a contest prep, you can push that high intensity really, really hard and get a ton out of it. Eventually there reaches a point where everyone knows they've been at that point in contest prep. When they're so tired, if they're at work in the bathrooms down the hall, they're debating peeing their pants rather than walking to the bathroom because they're just so exhausted. When you're at that point, you're not going to get anything out of the high intensity. And so it's hard to, so at some point we usually switch to a list at a steady state, but it's hard to know when the right time for that is.
Yeah, and you are kind of, you like the cardio to prescribe cardio for your clients.
Yeah.
So what would be the maximum time that one would do?
The max I like to do is 60 minutes HIIT total per day, which would be 2 30-minute sessions. And I would prefer to do much less than that. I prefer a max to be 20 minutes, 2 times a day, 6 days a week. And it all depends on really how precise you are in the off season, you know. And I always tell people, if you don't like cardio, then fix it. You can avoid cardio by what you do in the off season, you know. So like that pizza you really wanted to eat or those chicken wings you really wanted to eat, imagine those as cardio sessions, because that's what they're going to be in contest prep.
As an extra minutes.
Yeah.
Do you still accept clients, by the way?
Yeah. I don't have if I have openings, I'll take anyone as long as they're willing to work hard and are motivated. I don't care about names, or the most rewarded clients are usually not the big names. It's the person who doesn't know what they're doing, or has been spinning the wheels for years, and you can finally get them over that hump. But yeah, I'm taking clients, and I have openings right now. I'll take anyone that's motivated and willing to work. I don't care if you compete and actually, because of my earlier degree in exercise science and nutrition, I used to work as a nutritionist for a cardiology office. And so about 20% of my clients are still actually like cardiac patients or IBS, Crohn's, SIBO, Candida type patients. So if you're someone listening and you actually have some kind of GI issue and you're looking for a coach with that, I like to do that also.
How could people contact you? Because I want to link it down below.
Yeah, of course. www.troponennutrition.com. It's a long name to remember. So if you just Google Justin Harris Nutrition, it'll come up. Or you can go to Troponin_nutrition at Instagram. Or I think if you search Justin Harris on Instagram, it probably shows up also.
Yeah, Justin Harris, and it jumps off. That's how I found you. I found you after Luke, speaking to Luke, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was a really nice guy. Wishing you good luck, and wishing good luck to your daughter at the.
Yeah, I got tough day today.
Yeah, so thank you for your time. And once I'm done with translating it to the whole language, so just I will post it and keep you updated with. It should take 1 to 2 days because I'm.
Man, take your time. That would be a pain in the butt. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.